Beep, 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 beep. Live from Wellston, Georgia, it's another episode of the Wartown Times. Be sure to stay up to date by joining the Wartown Times Facebook group under Facebook.
Welcome back to the Wartown Times Season 2. I am your humble author, narrator, and fictional character, Daniel Louis Crumpton. So, it's been a while since the last season, and we apologize for the delay, but the team at zeninthecar.com and the Wartown War Room have been steadily building the foundations for where we're going to go this season. So, we're going to be changing the format a little bit this year from what we did last year. As you know, last year we covered the initial months of the historical election of Madam Mayor LaRonda Patrick and the resistance that she received from some incompetent city council members playing politics, save Larry Curtis and Derek Mack. You guys rock. This year we're going to be taking it into a different direction. We're going to be looking at other areas in our local government that really need some attention and some adjustment very quickly. But first, we feel that it's necessary to lay groundwork for education as far as what the proper scope of law is. You know, most people are under the impression that what comes from the District of Columbia or the federal level is actually the law. And in a constitutional republic, that's not the way that it is. The source of the law in a constitutional republic is we the people, not bureaucrats far, far away. And so in order to effectively educate you guys in Wartown to make you more confident in making a change here in Wartown for the better, what we've done is we've created a friendly neighborhood manifesto. And you can find this PDF friendly neighborhood manifesto by going to zeninthecar.com, and up on the menu there you will see the Wartown Times Project, a friendly neighborhood manifesto. You can download or print out the PDF. It's an easy read, very digestible, very articulate, very easy to comprehend. And in the first few episodes of the Wartown Times Season 2, we're going to actually be digging into this manifesto to properly educate everyone here as far as what the role of our local government and things like peace officers and judges and attorneys are supposed to be doing. And so it's going to be real edifying for all of you. So we would also encourage you to download the PDF and email it to your city council members, email it to peace officers email it to anyone who works for the city government, so they too can be fully equipped and know what their role is as public servants. And so we find that especially for peace officers, this manifesto is really effective in making their job easier, safer, and more beneficial in their service to us, we the people. So in the first few episodes, we're really going to be drilling into it, and I encourage you to look along as we do. The next thing is, we did start a Wartown Times Facebook group where we're going to be spearheading activism here in Wartown, disseminating information like this, collecting information from all of our Wartown Robins or snitches who tell me about the corrupt going-ons behind closed doors. I call you my Wartown Robins. So go to Der Ferienboeken the next time you're on it, which will be in 20 seconds, and look for the Wartown Times group. Join the group and share your story, share any information that you may have, anything that you want the Wartown Times to kind of look at. We would appreciate that there. So go and check that out. Also, if you could, we do a lot of stuff at zeninthecar.com other than the Wartown Times. We do philosophy, spirituality, comedy, all sorts of things like that. So if you want all of the Zen in the Car goodness sent directly to you every time we produce anything, go to zeninthecar.com and put your email address in the subscription box. And we look forward to seeing you in our email list. Also, we did finally we gave in and opened up to TikTok, and we've been putting out some pretty decent TikToks over there at Zen in the Car. So if you could subscribe to that, hit the bells and notifications, all that good stuff, give us some dopamine. We need it. It's a drug. Instagram also, all the Twitters and the Twits. So all that stuff can be found at zeninthecar.com. So subscribe to all of our stuff. Stay active. It'll do you good. But a lot of you guys who are behind a badge or who work for city government have come to me, out in public since the last season and have told me that you appreciate what we're doing here and to keep it up, that it is making a difference despite, some objections by some people who have agendas. And we really do appreciate that, and we want to carry on that tradition this year by focusing on some other areas that really need attention here in Wartown. So Like I said, this is more of a housekeeping video to let you know that we are about to return to the fold. We think that the narrative for this season is quite interesting, quite alarming too. Some of the heroes and villains that you're going to come in contact with are, well, they're characters, that's for sure. But it'll be an interesting season this season for sure. Also, don't forget, we did just open up the Zen in the Car store, and you can support our work here by going and picking up a Zen in the Car t-shirt or a mug or a phone cover, something like that. Every little purchase helps us over here to run the operation. And we will be adding more collections to the Zen in the Car store, like the Wartown Times collection and some other cool things as we build it. But until then, you can pick up a Zen in the Car shirt. If I see you on the street in Wartown with it, I'll throw up the peace sign, because peace is great. But anyway, I'm glad that we're back. I'm glad that you are back, and we hope that you follow along with us and join with us, especially on the Facebook group, to make a difference here in Wartown. We did last year, and I have every confidence that we will again this year. So as we move forward, we're going to be drilling into the manifesto to build a groundwork for education, for all of you to be fully equipped and informed and confident in your engagement with city government. So until next time, all of you in the fictional city of Wartown, stay well.
Welcome to the Wartown Times Season 2, Episode 1. I am your fictional character, narrator, and author, Daniel Louis Crumpton. So as I said in the Road to Wartown Times, we're going to be changing up the format a little bit this year. And in the first few episodes, we're going to be going over a document that the crew of Zen in the Car and the Wartown Times put together called a Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto. And so in this very brief document is a good summary of where society at large has gone astray from the simplicity of the law. So it's going to basically be educating the every man and every woman like you and me to what the actual nature of law and the role of government is, and showing you exactly how far away we've kind of strayed from that. So legal disclaimer, no one who worked on the manifesto is a member of the Bar Association or an attorney, thank the Lord. However, we are Americans, and we can read simple documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and we can kind of look at the language, the common language, and understand that that's for us and it's for you. It's not for specifically people who have a bar association card, but it's for we, the people. So that's what this document's really going to cover. I mean, you are welcome to add your commentary wherever you may find this manifesto, your agreements, your disagreements, your corrections, your input. Any of that is clearly welcome in the marketplace of ideas, which is what America should be. But we do want to go over the manifesto to kind of put some perspective on the proper lens on how to look at what's going on in the city, the fictional city of Wartown, to see where maybe we can make some corrections. So again, you can follow along at zeninthecar.com and go to the Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto. And I do want to give credit where credit is due. This particular manifesto was compiled by the likes of Alan Merritt, Dave DePuma, Sabrina Black, John Galt, Mona Lucia, Dorian Flagg, Olympia Runabout, Nicholas Something, and of course, Daniel Louis Crumpton. So without wasting too much more time, we want to get right to school, get right into the meat of this manifesto. So we hope you enjoy, and we hope that this edifies you as to your sovereignty as an American to exert your individual rights. Let's go. Warner Robins, the fictional city most referred to as Wartown with the kiddies. With few exceptions, Wartown is for the most part like any city one can find on one's travels through America, cut from the same cloth, one could say, or running on the same blueprints as any other town, fictional or otherwise. You might hit if you were so inclined to throw a dart at a map. Sure, there are some differences in this community, such as it being in a symbiotic relationship with one of the largest military bases in the world, and having the sub-nickname the Black Hole, for reasons we shall expound upon later. And the fact that it is where you and I keep all our stuff. That last one is enough reason, one would think, to put the illusion of social media being reality down for a while to look around the actual reality we can engage with and change for the better. Change is a tricky thing. It usually comes much later than we think it should. Perhaps the reason for this is because social media is not the only illusion we are under, but the idea that change only comes from a singular messiah or a critical mass of the majority to bring it about. This, in our opinion, is exactly why it comes later than we think or know it should. Change requires not a superhero nor everyone to all at once become aware of what the problems are. Rather, it only requires a minority of informed, educated, passionate, and active warriors to bring it about, which kind of puts you, the reader, on the hook with the opportunity to decide who you really are. As we progress through this friendly neighborhood manifesto, specifically designed to bring about positive change in Wartown, you will have to make the decision after the facts are put before you if they are acceptable to you, if you can do something to change them, and most importantly, if you will. The choice will be yours to know these things and continue to go along and get along, or to come into your own power as an individual and free American to take responsibility for the things around you that can in fact be impacted by your existence. There is no ideation here to change the country or the world. There is no aspiration to bring about a nationwide or global revolution back to a republic where the rule of law is honored and the rights of the individual are protected. May the heavens fall. No, what is being put before you are simply a roadmap of ideas or actions which can be utilized to, at the very least, bring a revolution to Wartown. We want to thank you first for taking the time to assimilate this friendly neighborhood manifesto, and obviously would appreciate you assisting us in spreading it to potential Wartown warriors willing and able to engage with the issues we will present here. But most of all, we want to thank you for the stand you will make for your community, your family, your friends, and yourself, all of which have been impacted by the subject matter to follow. 1. The root of the problem. We all know that the root of any problem is, of course, ignorance. That's a given that we often take for granted when discussing or contemplating the issues of the day. When you decide to dive into the root of an issue or problem, your ultimate basement of blame is going to be ignorance. While there are certain classes within Wartown who no doubt would be content to believe there are not serious problems within the fictional city limits, content to pretend that the international city was a prime example of community and a slice of Americana, yours truly would refer you back to the introductory thoughts of ignorance. For the rest of us residing, working, or serving within or around Wartown, we know very well that there are indeed some very serious problems. We discuss them between fences, we talk about them when we bump into friends or family at the grocery store, we complain about them at the gas pumps and try to cope with their continuation in our city by using them as a punchline to a joke we are all the butt of. These problems we will in detail explore. However, it is best to first be specific of the underlying ignorance that allows the problems to spiral up like brambles of thorns. That being who you are in the scheme of things and what rights you have as the unique individual that you choose to be. Put simply, if you, the reader, are ignorant of the tremendous number of rights you hold, your power is, and will always be, subcontracted to the state and those who make up the systems within it, who we all know do not have your best interest in mind. Pretty speeches and campaign promises be damned. There is a story in the book of 2 Kings which finds us reading about the nation of Israel after a prolonged period where no one actually read the law, yet continued growing government under the assumption that they were indeed following the law. Having neglected the reading and study of the actual law, allowed the perpetuation of widespread ignorance from the working class all the way up to the king himself. Systems were built, positions were filled, coins of silver and gold flowed wheresoever the ignorant willed them, through whim. Yet those systems and appointments were all maintaining their existence through ignorance and what we call now color of law, fictions of law, that ultimately have no actual power over the flesh and blood people and bestow no power to the crown to be enforced. What we see in 2 Kings is an entire nation operating under mass assumption that the systems and functions of government operating around them are doing so correctly. And that being the case, no one even knew they were supposed to stand up to the corruption since they didn't even know it was there. By fate and circumstance, a copy of the law was recovered and reviewed, then brought before the king. And Hilkiah, the high priest, said unto Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, and he read it. And Shaphan the scribe came to the king, and brought the king word again, and said, Thy servants have gathered the money that was found in the house, and have delivered it into the hand of them that do the work, that have the oversight of the house of the Lord. And Shaphan the scribe showed the king, saying, Hilkiah the priest hath delivered me a book. And Shaphan read it before the king. And it came to pass, when the king had heard the words of the book of the law, that he rent his clothes. And the king commanded Hilkiah the priest, and Ahikam the son of Shaphan, and Achbor the son of Micaiah, and Shaphan the scribe, and Uzziah the servant of the king, saying, Go ye, inquire of the Lord for me, and for the people, and for all Judah concerning the words of this book that is found. For great is the wrath of the Lord that is kindled against us, because our fathers have not hearkened unto the words of this book, to do according unto all that which is written concerning us. While in Israel's case, they seem to have a government official who could admit erroring and endeavor to correct the mistakes, this is probably not a luxury we have here in Wartown. You will be very hard-pressed to find a city or government official that will reverse a vote, arrest, ruling, citation, fine, or other acts of violence when they have done so in a manner which undermines or deprives flesh and blood Americans' civil, natural, common, constitutional liberties. This is apparent because each of them has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution while protecting it from enemies both foreign and domestic, but apparently don't seem to mind acting against it on a daily basis. And when I say a daily basis, I literally mean a daily basis. How can it be that public servants will swear an oath obligating them to operate within the parameters of no one having their rights violated, but consistently vote, act, and move contrary to the very small document in which they pledged their allegiance? Let us not forget that the Constitution and Bill of Rights is small enough to fit in one's breast pocket, not volumes and volumes of scribbles to be found at law libraries in state houses. The founding documents of this nation were written in such a way that every man and woman would be able to understand and apply them, from the most undereducated farmer to the scholar in university. Yet we do not see the application of the clear language of the text being given any consideration by public officials who we pay to uphold it. The answer is either they've been derelict in their duty to open the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Declaration of Independence to be read of by themselves, or they have and simply do not care. If the latter, then our first instinct should be to ask why. It is our belief the answer to that question can be found in another place within the text of the Bible, 1 Timothy 6:10. And there you have it. The root of the problems we find within Wartown is a simple riddle to solve. Like ancient Israel, ignorance of the law through assumptions to the contrary. Careful we must be to not fall into the same field of wrath by partaking of these evil deeds. 2. The simplicity of the law. Perhaps you've heard of an individual by the name of Jesus Christ. Regardless of your interpretation or religious, spiritual, or political view of this individual, it's probably safe to say that you, the reader, at least know the overall story that's associated with him. Here you have an individual who, according to the text of the Bible, was completely innocent. He committed no crimes, he committed no blasphemies, he committed no sin. Yet still, this spotless lamb was led to the slaughter by the institution of church and institution of state. How did this occur? Well, the studious reader of the Bible will surely know that it was done through things like kangaroo courts without due process of law, filled with religious bigotry one way or another, not only stripping the Christ of liberty, but also his life. Stripped of flesh and bone and spirit by soldiers who follow the orders without question of the adjudicators appointed by the emperor in an empire, and most certainly not a republic, which just so happens to be what America was envisioned to be, a republic. It is our personal belief that the story of the Christ was very much on the minds of the designers of the Constitution and Bill of Rights when it was being drafted. Seems to us that the Bill of Rights was almost a direct reverse engineering of what went wrong in the accusations, arrest, trial, and murder of Jesus Christ. A kind of way to ensure that this sort of thing, a completely innocent person being brutalized by the church or state, wouldn't happen or shouldn't happen here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Perhaps the fact that Jesus Christ did not speak to defend himself in the presence of paltry politicians who already had their minds made up, the law be damned, was what inspired our Fifth Amendment to remain silent. Is the fact that he could not face his accusers or be judged by a jury of his peers the reason why our founders wanted to ensure that we, the free, could? Maybe it is true the drafters of our Constitution and Bill of Rights were thinking of the Christ when they gifted us these documents, and in adhering, obeying, and defending them, we are indeed showing a sort of obedience to the Christ. And hey, if that keeps innocent people who haven't hurt anyone else from being kidnapped by the state, thrown in a cage, and essentially state-sponsored indentured servitude, can that really be a bad thing? The law is pretty simple if you keep the allegory of the Christ, regardless of your interpretation of his existence, in mind. The idea for our justice system is supposed to perform the philosophy of that it is better 100 guilty persons should escape than that one innocent person should suffer is a maxim that has been long and generally approved. Benjamin Franklin. And anyone making the claim that America was founded as a Christian nation should agree with, as well as strive for the vision of the good Benjamin Franklin on this topic. The simplicity of the law is that your individual rights end where another individual's rights begin. You cannot deprive them of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and they, or the state, cannot deprive you of such rights either. Now, keep in mind that any right you can connect with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you also retain, so long as in their usage they again don't deprive another of theirs in those spheres, which makes sense in a country where we never cease repeating that we are the land of the free. In a land of freedom, it is only common sense that you kind of do whatever you want to do with your life, so long as you aren't hurting anyone or damaging their property. You can express yourself, your spiritual views or practices, including sacraments and or ceremonies others may consider taboo or unorthodox, such as the indigenous peoples, etc., etc. Basically, understanding the law doesn't require a bar or any other degree from university, seminary, or a badge. Understanding the simplicity of the law is just one of good conscience. While some exhibit little to no conscience, especially within systems of the state, surely conscience is something we all share on a flesh and blood, human level. We intrinsically know, on an instinctual level, to be at peace with our fellow man, if it be possible. We can simply feel inside us the chaos when we act in a manner which deliberately, maliciously, and intentionally harm another person. Now, it is true that not everyone makes the majority of their decisions on this conscience. Nevertheless, it is there. The natural law is clearly written upon our hearts, not requiring volumes of statutes, acts, or ordinances. To be of good conscience, though, we believe once again the person of Christ would summarize all law upon "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind." This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets, the Gospel of Matthew. To operate in good conscience is, like the simplicity of the law, pretty simple if you understand this philosophy. What Christ, the ultimate judge, according to the text of the Bible, is saying is that if you truly live in service to your higher power in genuine love and treat your fellow man as extensions and emanations of that higher power, it becomes impossible for you to break the law. See? Simple. 3. The tangled web of legality. The obvious question from you, the reader, should be, if the law is fundamentally that simple, how have we found ourselves in a country and community where the judicial government systems can literally destroy my life over violations where no one was harmed and no property was stolen or damaged? And that would be a very good question, being the first of many which should arise in the thinking person's mind. These types of violations are called victimless crimes, and if you are taking the time to read this and are also in or around Wartown, you don't need me to convince you that flesh and blood human beings within this community are caught into the multiple state systems for a majority of their life, if not their entire life, due to a victimless crime, an eager and ignorant to the law enforcement officer or adjudicator with a grudge made an issue of. These issues individuals within the system destroys lives over is justified through statutes, codes, acts, and ordinances, or as they say, state laws, which are passed off to be actual law to those ignorant of the supreme law of the land. What is critical to understand at this point is this: any statute, act, code, or ordinance which is in conflict, contradiction, or contrary to the supreme law of the land, the Constitution and Bill of Rights, is not actually law. It is only given the force of law by mutual consent. Simplified, this means that if the state or local government write and pass any legislation, and in that legislation there is a conflict with your rights, the only way that legislation holds the power of law is if you, the free and individual American, agree that it is law also.
Article 6, Section 2. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or the laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding.
Or Marbury versus Madison, 5 U.S. 137, an 1803 case. Anything that is in conflict is null and void of law. Clearly, for a secondary law to come in conflict with the supreme law was illogical. For certainly, the supreme law would prevail over all other laws, and certainly our forefathers had intended that the supreme law would be the basis of all law. And for any law to come in conflict would be null and void of law. It would bear no power to enforce. It would bear no obligation to obey. It would purport to settle as if it had never existed. For unconstitutionality would date from the enactment of such a law, not from the date so branded in open court of law. No courts are bound to uphold it, and no citizens are bound to obey it. It operates as a near nullity or a fiction of law. Essentially, what the Supreme Court has ruled per Marbury versus Madison is that if any statute, act, code, or ordinance contradicts the Constitution, the entire statute, act, code, or ordinance is unconstitutional before the ink on the legislation dries, and no American is bound to obey it, nor does the state have power to enforce it. A piece of legislation falling into this category does not need to be changed or removed from state codes through any judicial process, as it is simply fiction to begin with. It doesn't exist as a law at all. That isn't us saying that. It was the Supreme Court. If you, the reader, take the appropriate amount of time to absorb this information and sufficiently know your rights, then naturally you will be asking a lot of questions about the endless amounts of OCGA, or Official Code of Georgia Annotated, that are obviously and clearly in contradiction to your rights. For example, if you, the free and individual American, have a right to travel freely and unencumbered upon the public roads paid for by our tax dollars, why is it that you can be thrown in a cage if you operate a motor vehicle without a license? Or, if you have a First Amendment right to express your spiritual practices as well as express intimate relationships, what nuttery is it to go down to the local courthouse to pay for a marriage license if you have a right to life, which includes hunting and foraging for food? Who is it that is mandating a hunting or fishing license? Clearly, the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. So where does the logic of a firearms license fit in? These are just a few contradictions to the supreme law imposed upon you that you perhaps never thought about in this way before. And perhaps it is time you did. Some of you, dear readers, are thinking to yourselves, well, things like that are state laws, which is why licenses for these things and victimless crimes aren't mentioned in the Constitution. And if you are, we would have you pause, reread this section, then truly consider your logic. If said logic is intended to justify the power of law with statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances that contradict the Bill of Rights, again, state law is statutory, which essentially means given the force of law by mutual consent. If you consent that a statute, act, code, or ordinance has the force of law, even through your own ignorance, well, it does. On the other hand, if you are awakened and aware to the truth of the supreme law of the land and understand that, once again, unless you're violating another individual's rights or disturbing their property, the government really doesn't have the power to force you to contract with them. Again, that's not us saying that. That's the Supreme Court. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, 319 U.S. 105, a 1943 case, quote, a state may not impose a charge for the enjoyment of a right granted by the federal Constitution, and that a fiat license tax here involves restraints and advance the constitutional liberties of press and religion, and inevitable tends to suppress their existence. That the ordinance is non-discriminatory, and that it applies also to peddlers of wares and merchandise is immaterial. the liberties granted by the First Amendment are and in a preferred position, since the privilege in question is guaranteed by the federal Constitution and exists independently of the state's authority. The inquiry as to whether the state has given something for which it cannot ask a return is irrelevant. No state may convert any secured liberty into a privilege and issue a license and a fee for it, end quote. Now, we encourage you to actually read the case for yourself. However, clearly from the small citation, you are intelligent enough to understand that the Supreme Court has ruled that states simply do not have the power to convert any right you can pull from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and force you to contract with them for licenses and fees to do things you already have a right to do. Remember that whole endowed by your creator bit? That means you don't have to ask permission to do it. Least of all, ask the state. To further this proper perspective of the law, let's look at Shuttlesworth versus Birmingham, Alabama, 373 U.S. 262, 1962 case. If the state does convert your right into a privilege and issue a license and a fee for it, you can ignore the license and a fee and engage the right with impunity. Again, for a full understanding of the above citation, do research the case. We understand this new information might have you looking at exactly what law is and exactly what crimes and criminals truly are, as you should. Are the endless amounts of state scribbles we call state law, statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances, most of which are in clear contradiction to all our rights, and therefore null and void of law. Which means you don't have to obey them, silly goose. How then are we, as an alleged moral people, perpetuating an industry within our community that is designed to put people who have hurt no one and have damaged nor stolen no thing into cages? How are we allowing a community that is literally, through threat of force, destroying lives and putting them into private, for-profit prison systems and probation systems? As Creationist Cat would say, that doesn't sound very Christian. Now, here are some further citations that boast the supremacy of the Constitution and your vast freedom. 16 Am Jurisprudence 2D, Section 97, then a Constitution should receive a literal interpretation in favor of the citizen is especially true with respect to those provisions which were designed to safeguard the liberty and security of the citizen in regard to person and property. That's Byers versus United States. 16 Am Jurisprudence 2D, Section 155. Since the Constitution is intended for the observance of the judiciary as well as other departments of government, and the judges are sworn to support its provisions, the courts are not at liberty to overlook or disregard its commands or counteract evasions thereof. It is their duty in authorized proceedings to give full effect to the existing Constitution and to obey all constitutional provisions irrespective of their opinion as to the wisdom or the desirability of such provisions and irrespective of the consequences. Thus, it is said, the court should be in our alert to enforce the provisions of the United States Constitution and guard against their infringement by legislative fiat or otherwise in accordance with these basic principles. The rule is fixed that the duty in the proper case to declare a law unconstitutional cannot be declined and must be performed in accordance with the delivered judgment of the tribunal before which the validity of the enactment it is directly drawn into question. If the Constitution prescribes one rule and the statute another in a different rule, it is the duty of the courts to declare that the Constitution and not the statute governs in cases before them in judgment. 16 Am Jurisprudence 2D, Section 256, the general rule is that an unconstitutional statute, whether federal or state, though having the form and name of law, is in reality no law, but is wholly void and ineffective for any purpose, since unconstitutionality dates from the enactment and not merely from the date of the decision so branding it. An unconstitutional law in legal contemplation is as inoperative as if it had never been passed. No repeal of an enactment is necessary, since an unconstitutional law is void. The general principles follows that it imposes no duty, converts no rights, creates no offices, bestows no power of authority on anyone, affords no protection, and justifies no acts performed under it. A contract which rests on an unconstitutional statute creates no obligation to be impaired by subsequent legislation. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law. No courts are bound to enforce it. Persons convicted and fined under a statute subsequently held unconstitutional may recover the fines paid. A void act cannot be legally inconsistent with a valid one, and an unconstitutional law cannot operate to supersede an existing valid law. The general principle stated above apply to the Constitution as well as the laws of the several states insofar as they are repugnant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States." End quote. 4. Briefly applying all this common sense. It would benefit the people of our community to begin adjusting their vocabulary for change to begin to occur. After all, that is what this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto is about, bringing about positive change in Wartown, lest we forget in the midst of this simple and extremely beneficial information we are receiving. Why we say that is because, again, it is not necessary for the state, country, or world to change for the better ahead of us. It is possible to bring the change here to Wartown as an example to other communities. And truth be told, the endeavor really isn't all that difficult. In fact, it's easy. And the easiest steps is the first, which happens to be using words the right way. Not all of them, what would be the fun of that? No, just a few words such as crime and criminal, law and statute. You see, what we have collectively as a community been conditioned to do is infer that an individual who has violated a statute, act, or ordinance is a criminal who has committed a crime. However, now we are fully informed and know that is not true. These are not the proper usages of these words at all. With this old yet new information, it would be appropriate to run through a few scenarios and properly ascertain the reality of certain situations. Question: have you committed a crime if you jaywalked? Answer: no. No one else has had their rights or property infringed upon. Question: have you committed a crime if you're not wearing your seatbelt in an automobile? Answer: no. No one else has had their rights or property infringed upon. Question: have you committed a crime if you're operating an automobile with broken signals or other mechanical defaults? Answer: no. No one else has had their rights or property infringed upon. Question: have you committed a crime if you choose to put substances into your body not ordained by the state legislature? Answer: no. No one else has had their rights or property infringed upon. Question: have you committed a crime by possessing substances not ordained by the state legislature? Answer: no. No one else has had their rights or property infringed upon. Question: have you committed a crime by cultivating substances not ordained by the state legislature? Answer: no. No one else has had their rights or property infringed upon. Clearly, in just a few brief questions, we can come to an even simpler understanding of how law actually works by repeating in our minds, if there is no victim, there is no crime. As this mantra certainly cuts through any confusion as to what the law actually is, despite what a member of the Bar Association may have you believe. Now, are there statutes, acts, and ordinances pertaining to the above scenarios an individual can violate? Yes, of course there are. Tons of them, like oodles of them. Yet, we must remember that statutes, acts, and ordinances only have the force of law by mutual consent. One party claiming the statute, act, or ordinance has been violated and is enforceable as law, and another party who must consent to it having the force of law. This consent can be and is often given by ignorance and without full disclosure of these things. Basically, you are fooled into giving these things the force of law by not knowing that you haven't broken any law at all. Now, think of every citation you've ever turned money over to the state for, or how many times you were kidnapped to a cage where no one was hurt and no property was stolen or damaged. Then, appropriately, become angry. And what about all the fines and fees that are imposed upon the good people of Wartown for violations of statutes, acts, and ordinances, many of which surround the concept of licensing, which is an interesting topic to also reevaluate given this new information we're discussing. To keep the topic of licensing very simple, take a moment to think about James Bond's 007, who we all know has a license to kill. Now, why exactly is it that James Bond would need a license to kill? Well, the obvious answer is that 007 would need a license to kill because it is illegal, immoral, and unrestrained to kill, as that is clearly the violation of another person's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Going with this line of reasoning, a license is permission to do a thing which is otherwise unlawful, immoral, and restrained. Which makes sense because the word license comes from the word licentious. Licentious. 1. Characterized by a license, unrestrained by law or morality, lawless, immoral, as a licentious press or stage, licentious wickedness. 2. Lewd, lascivious, offending against chastity as a licentious man, licentious behavior. 3. Unrestrained by strict rules of correctness as a licentious manner of writing, of painting. Synonyms: uncontrolled, unrestrained, unruly, lax, loose, dissolute, profligate, lewd, abandoned. That's Webster's New International Dictionary, 2nd edition, unabridged. Now, with the correct understanding of what exactly a license is, permission to do something unlawful, filthy, and lewd, we should ask ourselves what we are forced to get them for and why. The best way to apply our newly accumulated knowledge is to again ask ourselves some very fundamental questions. Question: do you require a license or permit to engage in holy matrimony? Answer: no. Engaging in holy matrimony is a previously secured right that does not require permission by the state, per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Question: do you require a license or permit to own or carry firearms? Answer: no. Only in carrying firearms is a previously secured right that does not require permission by the state, per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Question: do you require a license or a permit to operate a motor vehicle to travel freely and unencumbered? Answer: no. Traveling freely and unencumbered is a previously secured right that does not require permission by the state, per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Question: do you require a license or a permit to build on or modify your property? Answer: no. Building on or modifying your property is a previously secured right that does not require permission by the state, per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Question: do you require a license or permit to hunt, fish, or forage for food? Answer: no. Hunting, fishing, and foraging for food is a previously secured right that does not require permission by the state, per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Question: do you require a license or permit to partake of plant-based medicines or spiritual sacraments, such as cannabis, psilocybin, or other mind spiritually expanding substances? Answer: no. Your right to life and expression of worship are previously secured rights that do not require permission by the state, per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Obviously, these are just a few simple questions one should ask themselves regarding what Americans can and cannot do without license or permission from the state, but is in no way where a thinking person should stop. A thinking person would be aggressive in favor of interpreting their previously secured rights towards anything and everything that can be pulled from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Supreme Court agrees. Essentially, what assimilating this information allows you, the good people of Wartown, to do is realign your perspective back to the appropriate one of we the people being free, in a town that is free, in a country that is free. Free people do not need permission from anyone or anything to go about their lives, yet here in Wartown we live in a state of cognitive dissonance each time that we do. It is critical to understand that these statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances, licenses, permits, and fines derived thereof do not have to be struck down or litigated over. No court must hear individual instances of a statute, act, code, or ordinance infringing upon our rights for it to be unlawful. It is unlawful by default if it infringes upon our rights. This leaves we the people free to engage with our rights with impunity. To apply the common sense of all this to our individual lives, we must accept the fact that we are each responsible for knowing these things ourselves, with an attitude of it being common knowledge, because it's supposed to be. The reason many of the problems persist in Wartown, as well as towns across the country, is because of an absence of this knowledge and expectation for others to know it. Clearly, sharing this knowledge with family and friends is a great idea to reignite the brush fires of liberty in the minds of the community, but let us never be timid in the owning of our own rights first, to set the example to others. It is one thing to pledge allegiance to a flag and for the republic in which it stands at football games or other community events, but it is a completely different thing to be a walking ensemble of that pledge every day within the community. 5. Let's discuss Wartown law enforcement. The police. What a wonderful discussion for us to now move towards, given what we've learned so far. As clearly where the rubber of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances meet the road of we the people of Wartown is in the interactions most of us have with men and women behind the badge. Police are perhaps an essential component to a republic, make no mistake. A free people of Wartown surely have a vested interest in ensuring that our rights are protected and not infringed upon. We logically have no problem with a force of peace officers, keeping the peace. And we, the people of Wartown, should make the distinction in our minds and in our discussions between peace officers and law enforcement officers, because there is a difference. If there were not a distinction between a peace officer and a law enforcement officer, there would not be a need for two separate verbiages to refer to an officer of the police force. Therefore, it is incumbent upon we the people to understand for ourselves what those distinctions may be, to interact and cooperate with the Wartown Police Force and its officers to all our mutually beneficial goals, which we all should agree is the keeping of the peace. The distinction should not be known by just the people of Wartown, but the individual men and women who wear a badge within the community as well. The officers we employ to keep the peace, which is why they are invited to participate in this friendly neighborhood manifesto as well. This issue is a prime example of why words and how they are used matter. First, let's roll the term peace officer around in our minds and see how that feels. Feels good, right? An officer of peace, a peacekeeping officer. Nothing to do around town but make sure everything is at peace. The term feels good, doesn't it? Makes you eager to wave at an officer like that, or speak to an officer like that, or look up to an officer like that, and maybe want to be that when you grow up. The idea of a peace officer certainly isn't going to drum up tons of generational trauma that makes you cringe to think your hard-earned tax dollars are going to support those officers and their families. Absolutely not. A people who feels they are getting the service they are paying for from a firm have no qualms with supporting, with a portion, their function. A firm that is delivering above and beyond the purpose for which it was hired to execute its duties will find its employers rather satisfied. This means that the responsibility of the employer, and that would be you and the people of Wartown, is to make clear what it is you expect from your peace officers. Now, let's tackle the term law enforcement officer. How does that term feel to you? Bit much, bit forced, bit aggressive, bit meddlesome? And it should, naturally. The word force is smack dab in the middle, poking you in your subconscious like a high-beam flashlight shooting through your car window unnecessarily. Typically, after an interaction with a law enforcement officer, one receives a bill of attainder, commonly called a ticket or citation, with the words "violator's copy" at the bottom, prior to any sort of due process of law. This bill of attainder is usually an allegation that a statute, act, code, or ordinance has been violated, and as a result, the state is going to get some of your money, or your life, many times both, over legislation that never ceases, which often is nothing more than fictions of law due to their conflict with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to begin with. As the saying goes, the more you outlaw, the more outlaws you make, which is to say, you create a society of criminals by default, which becomes a feeding frenzy for law enforcement officers who are proactively seeking to kidnap, fine, cage, or kill flesh and blood human beings in incidents where there is no victim and no one's property has been compromised. No, rather what we often call law enforcement is in all reality the enforcement of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances, which again is not law if it is contrary to your previously secured rights. Now, ask yourself how the term law enforcement officer feels to you, and if that is the sort of thing you want to pay for, or work in, for that matter. Now, let us take a moment to simplify these thoughts between peace officer and law enforcement officer. Where can we find common ground from which these two branches must have sprung? Well, clearly it is that no matter how one refers to them, or how they refer to themselves, they have sworn an oath to the Constitution. They have constitutional duties to protect and preserve the Bill of Rights from enemies both foreign and domestic. In this fact, we can dissolve any confusion as to what we are employing the police and for what purpose they are employed: keeping the peace and upholding the law. Neither of these require any officer we the people of Wartown hire to know or enforce any statute, act, code, or ordinance. For a police officer working for Wartown taxpayers to keep the peace and uphold the law, the only requirements are a pocket constitution, common sense, and personal discretion. We, the people, need to make it absolutely clear to the good men and women who serve in the police force that we want them to first and foremost, when interacting with the public, to be consistently asking themselves if someone's rights have been violated or if their property has been compromised before engaging in potentially criminal actions they are unaware of themselves. After all, this is literally what they are being paid to do, yet it is abundantly clear that somewhere along the line the job description has been completely skewed. While there are many eager to jump on the bandwagon of bashing the men and women who wear a badge due to the countless injustices that occur from bad actors within police forces across the country, we would ask them first if they've done their part to make the simple duties clearly and specifically voiced to local police. Have the detractors and defamers of all things police done their own duty as employers to outline to new recruits as well as sitting police chiefs that they want peace officers over law enforcement officers that tend to do their enforcing on some kind of national level rather than an appropriate local level? While there are always some exceptions, we all know that if you, the reader, haven't dusted off your own pocket constitution in quite some time and are ignorant of these common sense philosophies bestowed upon us by previous generations, you certainly haven't made them known to your employees or held them accountable to them. How then can we expect men and women who are joining the Wartown Police Force to know them either, just because they are issued a uniform, badge, and a few gadgets? How can newly hired police officers perform the actual duties we hired them for if we, the people, their employer, do not take our place as the source and power behind all law and make it known to them? Again, we would reference the Holy Bible in that each individual must first pluck out the beam from their own eye before they attempt to remove the speck of dust from another's eye. Having peace officers over law enforcement officers in Wartown is indeed common sense for all parties involved. If the points of contact and or action from police officers are reduced to their constitutional limits within the actual law, the risk of harm, trauma, or even death to individuals, as well as the officers themselves, will be dramatically reduced. The burden of taxpayers to supply never-ending resources such as buildings, cruisers, tanks, and other lethal modalities of enforcing statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances will significantly drop, which in turn could mean higher and more beneficial pay for the peace officers doing what we hired them to do. Additionally, the morale and cooperation between the people of Wartown and those wearing a badge would escalate to common and mutual respect that creates an environment free from smacking very much like a nanny state that no American wants. Regardless of if other cities in the state or country choose to run their police force with a mindset that what comes out of the District of Columbia and its paranoid protocols is the standard everywhere, the good people of Wartown can and should do a better job to prove this is not so. We can and should provide each officer with a copy of their own pocket constitution and mandate them to know it and apply it in their daily tasks. We should not be hiring or promoting any officer that has not committed its principles to memory and demonstrates a stern seriousness to the oath they swore to it. Concordantly, it is the duty of the people to be on swift alert and response when any infringements of civil rights and liberties within Wartown occur by men and women wearing a badge upon any individual. This includes demanding such officers to be held accountable, being vocal without ceasing at city council meetings or calls to appropriate branches of government to demand these bad apples be relieved of duty and charged to the fullest extent of the law, if not filing criminal charges against them ourselves when appropriate. It is the duty of the people to be strict upon those behind the badge who would use color of law for revenue generation or personal advantage and bias. Extremely strict. unwaveringly strict. We must understand that immunity behind the badge is only applicable while the officer is within their duties and oath to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but is non-existent the moment that person steps outside of those parameters into the waters of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances. In other words, you are not immune to punishment when you violate the rights of another person because you were under the assumption that statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances are actually the law when they are not. This information is not, nor should be considered a burden by any of you, dear readers, police officer or otherwise, unless somehow there is an underlying motivation for those behind a badge to do their job with the intent of revenue generation and or personal advantage with bias, clearly. 6. The Constitution and a piece of paper walk into the bar. Lawyers are not your friends, literally. While you may have friends who are lawyers and while not operating in the capacity of a member of the Bar Association, they can be quite personable, ethical, and moral. But make no mistake that when beaming with pride and flashing their Bar Association card to agents of the court, said association is where their allegiance truly lies. While most of them tell themselves fairy tales about upholding the law, justice, and the best course of actions for their clients, most of them do not have the capacity to, or are simply unwilling, to appeal to the supreme law of the land to do away with most of the charges they earn a living defending people from. Again, many attorneys fail to utilize the genie lamp of the Bill of Rights because they're ignorant to just how powerful it is or could be in controversies without victims. Yet, many simply will not because in doing so, the preparation, duration, and compensation for them would be significantly reduced. Haven't we all had a coworker or business partner that overinflated the actual workload or stress load they're tasked with to justify the cost of having it done? Of course. The Bar Association is basically a whole lot of people like that who collaborate to collectively build the illusion that the law is really, really complicated and we the people best come a-running to them when we get caught in the web of legality. Is this collaboration some conspiracy that is intentionally executed by lawyers? Probably not. The blatant oversights of utilizing the Bill of Rights and subsequent Supreme Court rulings that reinforce it is done through the usual suspect of villainy, ignorance. The fact of the matter is most lawyers who suck on the teat of the Bar Association are completely unaware of the information you have read thus far in this friendly neighborhood manifesto that could, in most cases, keep their clients out of privately owned, for-profit prison facilities. They simply do not know these things. They were not taught these things in college, and they were not taught these things in law school. They were not shown that the profession they had decided to commit a significant amount of their time, energy, and money to go into is primarily dependent upon the belief that statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances are the law, but not the law. No, rather, they spent a whole lot of money to be taught that the law is specifically statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances. And they have a piece of paper or two from a university or two that came at great personal cost to affirm these illusions. And it is these expensive pieces of paper which bind them to an ego-based stance to outright reject the philosophies presented by our founding fathers, documents, and Supreme Court rulings, which are merely being cited here in this friendly neighborhood manifesto. You see, to a lawyer, or anyone for that matter, to be confronted with the suggestion that they spent a considerable amount of their life learning to perpetuate a farce, well, that can really do a number on the old ego and sense of intelligence, which is understandable, but not excusable. This is why in the event you have ever attempted to have a conversation with a card-carrying member of the Bar Association about the Constitution, their immediate knee-jerk response is to bring you down from the supreme law of the land into where they feel comfortable. That being the hall of smoke and mirrors we know as statutory law. Any point you attempt to make with them utilizing the Constitution and Bill of Rights is dismissed, demeaned, ridiculed, or scoffed at immediately with disdain. Not because you're wrong, but because treading above the surface of their expertise in supreme law kind of diminishes all the accomplishments they're ever so proud of, receive kudos for, and charge hefty fees for avoiding. The same ego-based responses are given in the unfortunate event you must procure a consultation with a member of the Bar Association over a violation of a statute, act, or ordinance. Feel free to call around law firms in Wartown and inquire if they will defend you for cannabis or other plant sacrament charges on a First Amendment basis, and then set a timer to see how fast they begin bringing up OCGA or how the local judge isn't going to be accepting that argument. Never mind their duty to argue them anyway. Bringing up the supreme law of our land, and in turn Wartown, will certainly get you a good talking down to by a member of the Bar Association. You will hear phrases that sound an awful lot like, yeah, that's not how things work. You might want to try living in reality. And by the time they're done, you will be left with the overwhelming impression that the Constitution, Bill of Rights, or Supreme Court don't exist or matter whatsoever. Without knowing the information in this friendly neighborhood manifesto yourself, you are compelled to believe them and depend upon their expertise and legalities, which again comes with considerable amounts of money being transferred from you to them. Again, this is not to say that every lawyer is deliberately doing this to deceive you for retainer fees and additional costs on an ongoing and unnecessary trial, as many of them believe they are charging a fair exchange for their time and services. Of course, this is also not to say that there are not attorneys who will deliberately drag cases out for that very purpose. At the very least, what you, the dear reader, need to understand is that you have a personal responsibility to know your rights, assert your rights, as well as the elements of your own case, should you be involved in one. And procuring an attorney to represent you rather than to counsel you is essentially saying that you're incompetent to represent yourself. It is the default position of those within the Bar Association to sell you on the emotion that you are indeed too incompetent to argue your own case, because that's what they get paid to do for a living. And hey, if that's the route you want to go, then more power to you. Just know that much like walking into a car lot, the salesman is going to be itemizing a lot of charges you do not understand and probably do not need. To get our head around this, let's ask ourselves a few more questions with the information we are assimilating thus far. If an attorney having your previously secured rights in mind were to represent you in the following instances, is not the following thought experiment the easiest and most cost-effective way to proceed against pending charges? Charge: possession of cannabis, psilocybin, San Pedro, ayahuasca, other plant medicines, or sacraments. Response: motion to dismiss with prejudice, as the state arbitrarily wrote a statute, act, code, or ordinance that conflicts with the previously secured rights of the defendant per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Charge: intent to distribute cannabis, psilocybin, San Pedro, ayahuasca, other plant medicines, or sacraments. Response: motion to dismiss with prejudice, as the state arbitrarily wrote a statute, act, code, or ordinance that conflicts with the previously secured rights of the defendant per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Charge: driving without a license. Response: motion to dismiss with prejudice, as the state arbitrarily wrote a statute, act, code, or ordinance that conflicts with the previously secured rights of the defendant per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Charge: driving without registration. Response: motion to dismiss with prejudice, as the state arbitrarily wrote a statute, act, code, or ordinance that conflicts with the previously secured rights of the defendant per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Charge: operating a business without a license. Response: motion to dismiss with prejudice, as the state arbitrarily wrote a statute, act, code, or ordinance that conflicts with the previously secured rights of the defendant per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Charge: violation of public curfew. Response: motion to dismiss with prejudice, as the state arbitrarily wrote a statute, act, code, or ordinance that conflicts with the previously secured rights of the defendant per Marbury v. Madison, Murdoch v. Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth v. Birmingham, Alabama. Obviously, this is a very simplified verbiage, but why shouldn't it be that simple? It is, after all, what these and many other frivolous charges can be reduced to. After all, isn't it the primary function of the courts and its officers to safeguard the rights of the American people and the people of Wartown first and foremost? Indeed it is. And if we see and experience a systemic neglect of this duty, we the people must demand a redress of grievance and the long train of abuses by the Bar Association, law enforcement, and the judiciary in their collaboration of apparently utilizing the court systems to violate our rights in the perpetuation of revenue generation in conjunction with scores of unlawful detainments in privately owned for-profit prison systems in our community. Is this the type of activity Wartown needs from members of the Bar Association practicing law in our community, unable or unwilling to fervently, efficiently, and aggressively defend our rights with the supreme law of the land? Do we want the only recourse from them when defending us to be the descent into inferior statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances, when appealing to the supreme law will get us out of the crosshairs of a system that has all but forgotten what we instituted it for? For those of us who have been abused by it, the answer is obvious. For those who will eventually be caught in it, remember that apathy of tyranny is cooperation with tyranny. This is true if you are a member of the Bar Association or not. 7. The judges in every state shall be bound thereby. The problems discussed with members of the Bar Association certainly carry over into the subject of judges we employ within our community, as there are also members with the same blind spots and or motivations to disregard the supreme law of the land. They rule from the bench or dictate the course of a trial brought before them based off their years of experience with practicing law and their legal education, which again is a very serious problem in Wartown if that experience and education is faulty, deficient, and damaging to the rights of we the people who allow them to continue discretions of the oath of office, which specifically charges them to protect the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Supreme Court rulings which reinforce said documents. Article 6, Section 2. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. Clearly, there is not one judge employed by we the people of Wartown that is with an excuse for ruling against, fining, caging, or depriving us of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in instances where there is no victim, given they've sworn an oath to uphold the document containing this clear, simple language. This reminds us of an actual event that transpired to a drafter of this friendly neighborhood manifesto in a Wartown court where the controversy was over a curfew violation with a fine above $20. The drafter in question demanded a jury trial in the matter and was astounded to hear from the judge presiding that they don't think you get a jury trial over these violations. The drafter in question proceeded to present the 7th Amendment to the Constitution, which states, "In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law." The response from the bench and state attorney was astounding, as both proclaimed that they had never seen that before. Let us repeat, the prosecuting attorney, a member of the Bar Association, and the presiding judge, also a member of the Bar Association, had never seen the 7th Amendment to the Constitution. And yes, this transpired in Wartown, where you live and likely will one day be in court. How many cases have been tried and ruled on with this sort of negligence to the law in our community, prior and post? After receiving the information in this friendly neighborhood manifesto and understanding its implications in Wartown, should any of us have confidence in the judicial system we pay for or the officers of the court we have employed within the community? Can we honestly continue believing these people are experts in the law when what they have shown to it is merely lip service thus far? Of course, we invite you to put these assessments to the test for yourself, dear readers, by attending cattle calls, pleadings, preliminary hearings, and trials within your community on any given day to see if these things are not so with your own senses. We invite you to investigate on your own if treason is occurring by willful degradation of the Constitution and Bill of Rights in our local courtrooms. After all, you are paying for all this and will pay even more for it if something doesn't drastically change. Modern slavery is the cost of apathy. A report titled Profiting from Probation, America's Offender-Funded Probation Industry states, this report, based largely on more than 75 interviews conducted with people in the states of Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi during the second half of 2013 describes patterns of abuse and financial hardship inflicted by the offender-funded model of privatized probation that prevails in well over 1,000 courts across the U.S. It shows how some company probation officers behave like abusive debt collectors. It explains how some courts and probation companies combine to jail offenders who fall behind on payments they cannot afford to make, in spite of clear legal protections meant to prohibit this. It also argues that the fee structure of offender-funded probation is inherently discriminatory against poor offenders and imposes the greatest financial burden on those who are least able to afford to pay. In fact, the business of many private probation companies is built largely on the willingness of courts to discriminate against poor offenders who can only afford to pay their fines in installments over time. The problems described in this report are not a consequence of probation privatization per se. Rather, they arise because public officials allow probation companies to profit by extracting fees directly from probationers and then fail to exercise the kind of oversight needed to protect probationers from abusive and extortionate practices. All too often, offenders on private probation are threatened with jail for failing to pay probation fees they simply cannot afford. And some spend time behind bars. This report tells many of their stories, end quote. The implications from this report are clearly felt and seen in Wartown, perhaps the worst area in the worst state regarding what is essentially modern-day slavery. The fact that Wartown is raking in ungodly amounts of money from its inhabitants and threatening or executing unlawful kidnapping, caging, and involuntary servitude of we the people who have not committed crimes is common knowledge to anyone that knows our nickname as the Black Hole. Others have even given Wartown the motto, "Come to Warner Robins on vacation, leave Warner Robins on probation." And while satirical, it is also quite accurate. Privatized policing, probation, and prison systems we have allowed in our community have been a large part of actual crime being committed, as it has and will continue to breed desperation in lower income communities where those caught up in the web of legality have little to no resources to defend themselves. Even if they can or are assigned public defenders, their rights are still compromised due to the issues discussed in previous sections with members of the Bar Association. Now we can see clearly how well-oiled a revenue-generating machine ignorance and public officials have created. In our community in Wartown, where we live. Sadly, it is because we, the people of Wartown, have not put a stop to this horrific system that it has spread throughout the country, and Americans everywhere are falling victim to what is not essentially, but indeed, a debtor's prison and modern-day slavery. This system is diminishing the freedoms and liberties our forebears secured and spitting in the face of every service member that our community claims to appreciate within it by undermining the principles we send them off to war to allegedly defend. It is stealing money from the people that generate it, stifling their ability to contribute in prosperous or innovative ways that could and would make Wartown a mecca for the state. It expands expenses for its perpetuation and is used to justify the militarization of the police and the establishment of a nanny state where any minor violation of a statute, act, code, or ordinance postpones and detours our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It is unethical, immoral, unlawful, and blasphemy to any people claiming to be free. Given the simple information that we've discussed throughout the course of this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto, it can now be seen clearly for what it is and why it is. All one needs to do in order to confirm the motivations for continuing this wicked system is file Freedom of Information requests at the Law Enforcement Center to inquire how much the Houston County Detention Center charges the people of Wartown to house inmates, many of which are there for victimless violations, versus the cost it takes to do so for this privately owned, for-profit monstrosity of people cages. Private for-profit corporations have a vested interest in putting flesh and blood human beings into cages or their systems for as long as possible. That is what they charge we, the people of Wartown, for. Corporations are not interested in justice. They are not concerned with the law. They could care less about freedom, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness, as these concepts serve as their most vicious competition. No, private for-profit companies are concerned about their bottom line. And in this realm, that means capturing as many people as possible for the smallest violations of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances to reap the greatest monetary reward. This is simple economics that does not require a diploma, law degree, bar association card, or a dress and a gavel to figure out. It simply requires common sense to see, with compassion for your fellow man. Isn't it time to begin asking our public officials if these are qualities they hold, and if so, what are they doing to correct this grave sin against their constituents in Wartown? You, dear reader, may also want to begin asking which long-sitting officials who have been in the public sphere of Wartown in an elected position have let these systems grow over the decades, and how much they might be profiting by doing so. But don't stop there. Start asking the newly elected officials in our community what they are actively doing or intend to do to put a stop to this horrific machine, which is fueled by the enforcement of legislation that is fictitious in light of the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Supreme Court rulings, which have already deemed most of them to be nullified. Shouldn't a list be made of those we employ that profit and perpetuate fraud through threat, duress, and color of law? Surely it should, and those that find themselves upon it might begin to change their tune on what the law is or what it is not when they are facing the stick of indictments rather than the carrot of accolades. The issue of policing, prison, and probation for profit has deliberately been addressed last in this friendly neighborhood manifesto, as it is the end result of the negligence of the ideals contained within our founding documents and lack of diligence in preserving the God-given rights we have all been endowed with for all mankind. Modern and technological slavery is the cost of our apathy in these matters, and such a beast does not and will not discriminate, as its only goal is to spread and self-perpetuate until freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for anyone is but a distant memory. 9. Conclusions and Solutions. In the beginning of this friendly neighborhood manifesto, we mentioned Wartown being known as the International City, due to the variety of cultures that come to our community, having been stationed at the Warner Robins Air Force Base. Servicemen and servicewomen from all over the country find their way here during their time in the armed forces, and for the duration of their orders, try to make it their home. When they are nearing the end of their stay, some going elsewhere around the world, yet others having the option to set roots and make Wartown their permanent dwelling, what impressions of our community do they hold? What experiences of our town will they take with them throughout the world, relaying to others they come across what it was like to call Wartown their home? Will they barely mention this place and its people, glad to have these zip codes in the rearview mirror, as nothing exceptional stood out to them from one carbon-copied city in a long line of cities they've set up shop in? Will their stay and future communication about us and our culture here barely be a blip on the radar of conversation, because, just like every other city in America, we the people of Wartown just go along to get along, resting on apathy, actionless complaints, cries of victimhood mentality, with no real spirit or power to stand up and out as a location worthy of remembrance, longing, and praise. Worse yet, will they describe Wartown to other communities around the world as the crowning achievement of George Orwell's worst nightmare? A police state that's completely dependent upon preying on its own people through systemic violations of the Constitution and Bill of Rights these servicemen and servicewomen signed up to safeguard? Will they warn others to steer clear from Wartown because its most profitable industry is slavery, debtors' prisons, and attorney fraternities who participate, facilitate, and financially elevate from enforcing statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances while ignoring the supreme law of the land? Will they carry with them horror stories of random traffic stops which threw them into court cattle calls to have their money extorted from them under threat and duress? Will they call us the black hole due to privately owned for-profit probation companies ensnaring them at the behest of long-sitting politicians, officers, and elected officials who have maintained a monopoly over the city of Wartown for the past several decades? Or is it possible that the greatest asset Wartown could possibly have is the reputation it builds as a true home to American ideas of freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which could travel throughout the world by word of mouth as our appreciated armed forces come and go? What if, in just our community, a massive, peaceful, and lawful return to a republic is decided upon, acted upon, reinstituted, and cherished so much that it becomes the very place those same servicewomen and servicemen will mark as the city they will one day retire back to, because it stands for what they defend? What if you, dear reader, took part in actively bringing up the information gone over in this document to city council members, peace officers, friends, or family in the Bar Association, and started a community conversation about what we could be? What if these conversations and simple actions within and around local government could begin walking back an economy built on subversion of rights towards an unstoppable economy fueled by the passion and ingenuity of its people? How far could the reach of influence of one community willing to do things differently go and call to others who might find it a haven from a country falling apart and falling into dystopia? What if Wartown appreciated the armed forces as it says it does and pays much more than lip service to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights they risk their lives to protect? Knowledge can be infectious. Knowledge which empowers is addictive. It is our belief that with the power of the simple knowledge contained within this document, a swift and effective return to a republic in Wartown is very possible. A republic is the form of government all cities are contracted to obey and operate within, as all state and city charters are dependent upon the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It is not an egregious thing for we the people of Wartown to remind our city officials of this fact and demand they return to the confines of the contract, as they are in positions to use discretion in favor of said contract, which in turn means using discretion in favor of us. While many officials would imagine that operating in government is complicated and technical, often referring to members of the Bar Association to interpret for them the clear language of the founding documents. Now, we all know this is in fact is not necessary and falls under negligence. Our city officials and peace officers are negligent in their oath of office and ability to execute it if they're incapable of reading, understanding, and operating within the confines of the Constitution, rather allowing attorneys to rule by having them dictate what the document says or means. The source and power of the law is not derived from the interpretations of members of the Bar Association. The source and power of law is not derived from judges operating within our community that rose from the same Bar Association. The source and power of law is not in police chiefs or sheriffs. The source and power of law is in we the people of Wartown. Yickwo versus Hopkins, 118 U.S. 356 says, quote, "Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But, in our system, while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people by whom and for whom all government exists and acts, and the law is the definition and limitation of power. It is indeed quite true that there must always be lodged somewhere, and in some person or body, the authority of final decision, and in many cases of mere administration, the responsibility is purely political, no appeal lying except to the ultimate tribunal of the public judgment, exercised either in the pressure of opinion or by means of the suffrage. But the fundamental rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness considered as individual possessions are secured by those maxims of constitutional law, which are the monuments showing the victorious progress of the race in securing to men the blessings of civilization under the reign of just and equal laws, so that, in the famous language of the Massachusetts Bill of Rights, the government of the Commonwealth may be a government of laws and not of men. For the very idea that one man may be compelled to hold his life, or the means of living, or any material right essential to the enjoyment of life at the mere will of another, seems to be intolerable in any country where freedom prevails as being the essence of slavery itself." End quote. The final authority on the law is you, dear reader. Again, the above words are a Supreme Court justice affirming this, and unless there has been an insurrection here in Wartown, it is still the case in our community. Our task is simple: to know these things ourselves, to educate others about them, to inform city officials to them, to expect city officials to use discretion in favor of them, to hold city officials accountable to them at every opportunity. In the age of the internet, where communication and monitoring is at the cutting edge and typically used against we, the people of Wartown, isn't it time this tool be utilized by us and for us? We think it is. And we invite you to join us in beginning this type of common sense thinking again in Wartown by engaging with us in the following initiatives. Bulk pocket constitutions. The foundation of restoring our community to a republic where our individual liberty is the priority is, of course, owning the founding documents, knowing what they say, and how to apply them in our daily lives. Additionally, having bulk pocket constitutions in our automobiles with us affords the opportunity to hand them out to fellow Wartown residents with contact information or QR codes to mobilize as a community in reinforcing this knowledge. It also will be appropriate to hand them to peace officers with other documentation they might request, informing them of their duty as well as our awareness to our rights and their obligation to protect them. Pocket constitutions also need to be supplied to any public official working in or from City Hall, as well as courthouses and any taxpayer facility. Fully informed juries. Supplying as many individuals as possible in our community with material which educates them to the fact that the jury is one of the best defenses to our individual liberty is essential. Many who find themselves serving on a jury where the state is assaulting an individual with victimless charges are completely unaware that regardless of if the person violated a statute, act, code, or ordinance or not, an informed jury can find the defendant not guilty with impunity. The jury can decide in deliberation that legislation is unjust with their verdict, despite the legislation being on the books. What better way to take the monetary motivation away from a runaway judicial system than to make it cost more to prosecute frivolous charges that will be dismissed by we the people than what the broken system could receive? City Hall and Council outreach. Having regular communication with our individual City Council members to share the information in this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto is critical, as many of our employees at City Hall are also unaware of these simple, fundamental pieces of information. Historically, we can go back to many votes on many agenda items which did not or do not fall in line with the principles of a republic, as in one way or another they violate these principles, which indicates a violation of all our rights. It is our responsibility to inform them when they are in error on their votes with relentless fervor. Wartown Robins. Being a safe haven for whistleblowers within city government or an avenue for those aware of active corruption in our city is an absolute must. The Wartown Times Group must make it widely known that people with news tips and information of any naughtiness in the systems of government we pay for are safe to pass this information along to us, as we can report and make such information widely known without the entangling alliances most local news media outlets are burdened with. We must create and maintain confidentiality to all would-be Wartown Robins or whistleblowers who want to point us in the right direction but have their anonymity protected with journalistic integrity. Having eyes and ears everywhere, from high offices to janitors, every resident of Wartown is a priceless resource in assisting us in keeping our public servants accountable. Loose lips sink ships, and that isn't always a bad thing. Wartown Warrior Press Passes. The Wartown Times Group operates under the First Amendment of the Constitution, and therefore will be providing press passes and badges to any of our active members who request one. Having little pieces of paper that remind government you have a fundamental right to do a thing is very empowering. Rather than constantly getting misinformed by bias and bought-out local media, isn't it time that we, the people of Wartown, reassert our power in the First Amendment and become the press ourselves? Getting a call or email from one or two disgruntled residents is easy enough to sweep under the rug. Refusing to be transparent with a widespread army of invested journalists is a completely different game altogether, isn't it? Citizens' comments. One of the greatest resources we, the people of Wartown, have at our disposal is the ability to attend and speak at City Council meetings during Citizens' Comments. Citizens' Comments are open to all residents to speak about the issues we want brought into the public discourse and have our expressions unedited, live-streamed, and in front of local news media outlets. This avenue affords us the opportunity to focus in on specific issues collectively with our numerous voices and repetitiously bring light to corruption, failings, or frustrations with local government officials until we receive a redress of grievance for them. We must always remember that corruption grows in the shadows, and it is our duty and obligation to use our individual and united voices to shed light on issues local media downplays or attempts to sweep away with sound bites.
With mobilization and communication, one city council meeting where scores of residents expressed their disgust that our tax dollars are being spent to cage flesh and blood human beings to later be subjected to essentially indentured servitude to privately owned, for-profit companies would certainly cause momentum for such injustice to be changed. Wartown Times Zoom meetings. Outside of citizens' comments, the Wartown Times will be having regular Zoom meetings for those within the group. These Zoom meetings will be utilized for strategizing and creating actionable measures to assist our local government officials back into the contract they have sworn an oath to protect. These regular Zoom meetings will be recorded and, with discretion, used for public dissemination via the Wartown Times in its various platforms. Peace Officer Outreach. It is vital that we educate our local police offices with the information contained in this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto so that they can be the front line in safeguarding our liberties. Each peace officer we employ within Wartown must understand that we are not consenting to the enforcement of statutes, codes, acts, or ordinances where no party has had their rights violated or property infringed upon. What we are paying for is that they do their due diligence to protect our liberties. Peace officers must be educated to use their discretion and common sense when interacting with we the people of Wartown. It is our duty to make men and women who serve with a badge repeat the mantra, no victim, no crime. Additional initiatives to be announced. The first steps in bringing the vision of this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto to Wartown are the awareness of the issues and realities of legality versus lawfulness. The primary objective of the Wartown Times is to bring together a dedicated, educated, and active group of Wartown warriors who will comprehend this information combined with the ability to articulate it throughout the community effectively. The most important aspect of our mission is re-injecting these philosophies and perspectives of the rule of law given to us by our founders and safeguarded by our armed services and people such as we. Therefore, the above initiatives are sufficient to begin the process, with further initiatives to be developed by the group itself, moving forward targeting specific problems one at a time until they're cleaned up. Additionally, as this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto circulates throughout the community, like-minded contributors are welcome to suggest amendments and addendums that will be added in updated editions. In the beginning of this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto, we cited the wisdom of the Holy Bible from 2 Kings, which beautifully illustrates how far a society can fall into ruin by believing they know the law and its applications, when in fact, true knowledge of the law had been long forgotten. Entire institutions had been built and ran under assumptions of law that had been delegated to so-called experts and denied by the people, from which is the source and power of law. Given what we have come to understand throughout the course of this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto, is it not safe to say that we, the people of Wartown, are also at a moment of decision? Will we, like so many communities across America, choose to continue allowing corruption to consume all our fundamental rights like a plague or virus? Or are we wise enough to repent or rethink what we have allowed to transpire through apathy and begin to reverse these problems for ourselves and our progeny? These are individual questions that must be answered by you, dear reader. We close out this Friendly Neighborhood Manifesto with profound words from a literary keystone of America. In the beginning of a change, the patriot is a scarce man, and brave, and hated, and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot. Mark Twain.
Beep, 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 beep. Live from Wellston, Georgia, it's another episode of the Wartown Times. Be sure to stay up to date by joining the Wartown Times Facebook group on the Facebook.